Late-night storm traps the slave and master's wife in the wine cellar. Then this happened. The storm rolled over the Georgia hills long before midnight. Heavy clouds pressing low against the earth like the sky itself wanted to collapse on the sprawling Whitfield plantation. The wind rattled every shutter, and thunder cracked through the humid air with a violence that made even the livestock tremble restlessly in their pens. Rain hammered the roofs, the fields, the winding dirt paths, turning everything into a trembling darkness soaked with dread and electricity. Eliza Whitfield had been pacing since dusk. She moved back and forth across the polished floorboards of her large, shadow-drenched bedroom, the tails of her pale silk nightrobe trailing behind her like a whisper. She was 24, young, beautiful, and lonely in a house meant for a family she had never been able to create. Her husband, Thomas Whitfield, was twice her age, and though he rarely raised his voice, he wielded silence like a whip. Cold indifference had become the air she breathed, and the storm outside only made that loneliness louder. Eliza tried reading, then sewing, then simply standing by the window, but the thunder kept breaking her focus. Eventually her gaze drifted toward the hallway, down the stairs, along the corridor that led to the storage wing, the wine cellar, the quiet place, the place she always escaped to when her thoughts grew too heavy. Thunder cracked again, so sharp the glass trembled. She pressed a hand to her chest and whispered into the storm, "Just a moment of peace, please." But the storm didn't care for prayers. She grabbed a small lantern, lit it with trembling fingers, and slipped out of her room. The house creaked with the weight of wind and old timbers. Each step she took echoed softly through the long hallways, accompanied only by the steady thrum of rain against the walls. When she reached the back stairwell, she paused. Another thunderclap made her jerk, and the lantern nearly slipped from her hand. The wind was stronger here, whistling through thin cracks around the old doorframe. She descended quickly. Below the house, the air changed, cooler, denser, carrying the faint scent of earth and aged oak barrels. Water dripped somewhere in the shadows. She set the lantern on a small shelf and began scanning the wine racks for a particular bottle she cherished on stormy nights. A deep red imported from France, one of the few indulgences her husband had ever approved. She found it, brushed dust from the glass, and turned back toward the stairs. But she froze. The cellar door had slammed shut. Hard! Eliza rushed to it at once, heart pounding. She pulled, twisted, shoved, but the old swollen wood had wedged itself firmly into the frame from the force of the wind. She whispered, "No, no, no, please open." But before she could make another attempt, she heard footsteps above, heavy, quick, and then the door rattled from the other side. A deep voice said through the wood, "Ma'am? You down there?" She knew that voice. Caleb, one of the house servants. Young, maybe 20, strong, quiet, thoughtful in a way that made her uneasy sometimes, mostly because she could never quite predict what he was thinking. His eyes always held something more, something watchful, as if he understood more than he let on. "Eliza?" he called again, worry in his tone. She startled at the way he said her name, soft, direct, too familiar for this house, but framed with concern rather than disrespect. "Yes, I'm here," she called back. The door jammed. The wind slammed it shut. "I'll get it open, ma'am. Just hold a moment." She pressed her hands to the wood, listening. Caleb pulled. She heard the strain in his breathing, the scrape of boots as he braced himself. But the storm had swollen the frame, and the door refused to budge. "Won't move," he grunted between attempts. Storm done twisted everything. Thunder clapped again, making the lantern flicker. Inside the cellar, shadows wavered around her. Eliza swallowed. "Is anyone else awake?" she asked. "No, ma'am. Everyone done gone to their cabins or beds before the storm hit. Master left before sundown. He won't be back till morning." That, more than anything, sent a ripple of unease through her. Being locked in a cellar with no one but Caleb aware of it. What if something happened? What if the lantern went out? What if another violent gust struck the house? and the cellar door shook so hard both of them gasped. Then a hinge warped with a loud metallic groan. Caleb cursed under his breath. "Ma'am." The top hinge done bent clean sideways. "I don't think I can pull her open no more." Eliza touched the wood between them, as though she could feel his presence through it. "What? What am I supposed to do?" There was a pause. Then he said, "Ain't safe for you to be down there alone, ma'am. Let me try the outer steps." Her heart lurched. The outer entrance, the one behind the house? The one that led underground by the magnolia trees? "Caleb, the rain. I'll be quick." Before she could protest, she heard him running across the floorboards above, then opening the back door to the yard. Rain howled in like a beast. Then the door slammed shut, leaving the cellar silent except for the storm. She hugged herself, breathing unsteadily. Minutes passed. Then more. Wind roared outside. Rain pounded the ground. The lantern flickered in the damp air. Eliza tried not to let fear take root, but it spread anyway. What if Caleb slipped? What if he couldn't find the outer entrance in the dark? What if lightning struck the yard? She whispered into the emptiness, "Please come back." Suddenly, footsteps splashing in mud, then boots thudding on the wooden steps outside the cellar wall. She ran toward the sound, hope lifting her chest. The outer cellar door rattled, then rattled again. "Then, ma'am?" Caleb's voice called more breathlessly. "This one's stuck too." Storm done shifted the ground beneath, waters flooding the hinge. She pressed both hands to the thick wooden planks separating them. "Can you open it?" "I'm trying." She heard him slam his shoulder into it once, twice, a third time, harder each time. Wood cracked, but the door refused to move. Rain struck him relentlessly. She could hear it pouring down the stairwell, soaking him through. Finally he panted. "No use. Both doors near swollen shut. We ain't getting 'em open tonight." A cold tremble passed through her entire body. "So I'm trapped here until morning?" A moment of hesitation. "We both are, ma'am." The words hit her like the thunder that followed. "We?" Caleb coughed lightly, trying to catch his breath. "I can't leave you alone underground in a storm like this. Water's already seeping down the outer steps. If it floods, someone gotta be here with you." Her heart hammered, not just with fear now, but something else she didn't want to name. "Caleb, you can't stay out there in the rain." "I ain't staying outside. I'm coming down." "What?" "No, Caleb, the door is stuck." "I ain't using the door," he said simply. Eliza blinked in confusion. "Caleb, what does that mean?" He hesitated. "It means there's that small vent window on the far side of the cellar, the one Master had put in for fresh air. I reckon I can pull the grate loose." She stared into the dusky corner of the cellar where the small iron-grated vent sat near the ceiling. Rainwater dripped through it regularly, but the opening was narrow, too narrow for comfort, too narrow for logic. "You can't fit through that," she said, more to herself than him. "Ma'am, I ain't leaving you alone. I'll make it work." She felt her breath catch, not because of danger, but because of the tone in his voice, steady, protective, determined. Something no one had ever offered her so freely. Before she could speak again, she heard him climbing up the outside stones toward the vent. Metal squeaked. Fingers tugged. The grate groaned, then gave way with a sudden crack. Rainwater splashed inside. Caleb's voice came low. "Stand back, ma'am." She stepped away, holding the lantern close. The vent darkened as his broad shoulders blocked the light from outside. Then he squeezed through, muscles straining, breath tight, boots scraping the stone. Water and mud streaked his arms and shirt. Finally, with a rough exhale, he dropped inside the cellar, landing in a crouch. Their eyes met. Lantern light flickered across his face, strong jaw, rain-slick skin, dark curls plastered to his forehead. He was breathing hard from exertion, chest rising and falling, shirt clinging to him. The storm boomed behind him like an omen, and Eliza realized just how small the cellar truly was. They stood only a few feet apart. Caleb lowered his eyes respectfully, water dripping from his clothes onto the dirt floor. "Begging your pardon, ma'am. Didn't mean to frighten you." "You didn't." she whispered, though her heartbeat told a different story. Outside, thunder roared again, shaking dust from the ceiling. Inside, the silence between them deepened. Caleb glanced at the jammed door, then at the vent he had forced his way through. "We ain't getting out till morning." Eliza swallowed. "So we're trapped." "Yes, ma'am." Lightning flashed, illuminating the cellar for a heartbeat. Her pale silk robe, his drenched shirt, their two shadows stretching long across the oak barrels. Then darkness again. Slowly, carefully, Caleb stepped farther inside, giving her space though the cellar offered little. He kept his gaze lowered, respectful, distant, but the awareness between them was unmistakable. Thick, dangerous. Eliza's voice trembled. "What? What do we do now?" He looked up just enough for his eyes to meet hers, and the answer came in a low, calm voice that made her breath hitch. "We wait, ma'am, and we pray the storm don't get worse." But the storm did get worse, and they were alone, in the dark, trapped together, with nowhere to run from what they were both beginning to feel. The storm never softened. If anything, it grew more violent, shaking the ground beneath the cellar as though the earth itself were shifting in its sleep. Rain poured through the vent in thin, steady lines, dripping onto the stone floor. Sometimes lightning flashed so bright that the cellar glowed bone white for a heartbeat. Sometimes it was so dark that Eliza could hardly see Caleb's outline a few feet away. But always, always, she felt him there, not touching her, not even looking at her for long, but present, solid, the only steady thing in a world rattling apart under thunder. She kept the lantern between them like a fragile boundary of flickering gold. Caleb wrung rainwater from his shirt, stepping carefully to avoid splashing mud on the hem of her robe. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Didn't reckon I'd come in looking like I climbed out a river." Eliza shook her head, her voice low. "You saved me from being alone. The state of your clothes is the least of my concerns." He paused at that, just for a moment, and something shifted behind his eyes. Something like surprise, something like gratitude, something that warmed the cold air around them. Eliza had never been spoken to gently in that cellar. Her husband's words down here were always numbers, orders, blunt remarks about barrels and inventory. Yet this young man covered in rain and mud, spoke with more care than Thomas ever had. Caleb moved to stand a respectful distance from her, leaning slightly against one of the barrels as he caught his breath. "You hurt yourself coming in through the vent?" she asked quietly. "No, ma'am. Just scraped my arm." He lifted it, revealing a long red mark stretching across his skin. Without thinking, she stepped closer, and he froze. Eliza stopped too, her heart pounding, but she still reached slowly for his arm. The lantern's glow slid over his skin as she studied the scrape. Nothing deep, nothing bleeding, but it still made something tighten in her chest. "You should wash this," she murmured, releasing his arm gently. "There's a water jug on that shelf." "You ain't supposed to do that," he said softly, eyes lowering. "Do what?" "Touch someone like me." Her breath caught. Thunder cracked so close above them that dust rained from the beams. She swallowed. "I'm not supposed to be trapped in a cellar either, Caleb. Yet here we are." He looked up at her, really looked this time, and for a heartbeat she felt exposed, as if he could see through the fragile layers she hid behind. Her loneliness, her years without tenderness, her aching wish to feel seen. She stepped back before she forgot herself. He washed the scrape with cool water, and she tried not to watch him, but she did anyway. The way his shoulders moved, the careful way he handled the jug as though afraid to waste a single drop, the quiet strength in him, not loud, not boastful, not like her husband's harsh authority, but steady, the kind that made her feel safe. When he finished, she sank onto one of the low crates near the lantern. Caleb stayed standing. The cellar was small, but he kept as much distance as he could without feeling like he was abandoning her. Silence stretched between them. Then Eliza whispered, "Do you think the storm will last all night?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied simply. "This one's angry. Ain't seen clouds like that in years." She drew her robe tighter. A gust of wind rattled the vent. Caleb noticed. "You cold?" "A little." He hesitated, then said, "Ain't much down here that's warm. Except those horse blankets in the corner." Horse blankets. Worn, rough, dusty, but warmer than nothing. She nodded. Caleb crossed the cellar, retrieved one, and brought it toward her. When he reached her, he stopped. His hands were large, calloused, steady as he held the blanket out. She reached for it at the same time, and her fingers brushed his. Just barely. But barely was enough. Eliza inhaled sharply. Caleb went still as stone, as if the slightest movement might shatter the fragile air between them. Her fingers trembled as she pulled the blanket from his hands. The lantern flickered wildly, casting long shadows across his face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Yes, ma'am." He stepped back fast, retreating into the dim corner near the barrels, putting space between them again. It was the right thing to do, the only safe thing, but her skin tingled where they had touched. Eliza wrapped the coarse blanket around herself and rested her back against a barrel, trying to ignore the strange heat that had begun gathering in her chest, heat that had nothing to do with the blanket. "Caleb," she began quietly, "how did you know I was in the cellar tonight?" He looked up, surprised by the question. "You weren't at supper. I was put to check the back hall lamps before the storm hit. Saw your bedroom door open. Figured you came down this way. You come down here sometimes." The last sentence was spoken carefully, respectfully, yet she felt something else behind it. "You've noticed?" He hesitated. "I notice most things round here, ma'am." Her heart fluttered, not in fear, in something dangerously close to being seen. She studied him, the quiet steadiness, the way he kept his eyes lowered, but always listened, always watched. She had known him for nearly 2 years, but she had never been alone with him, never spoken more than a few passing sentences, never knew the depth behind his silence. Another rumble of thunder rolled overhead. Eliza lifted the wine bottle she had brought earlier. "We might as well share this. We have a long night ahead." He blinked. "Ma'am, I can't." "Please," she cut softly. "It will help with the cold. And with the nerves." Caleb hesitated, then nodded once. She poured a small amount into the cellar's only extra cup, handed it to him, and drank from the bottle herself. The wine warmed her throat, her chest, her trembling nerves. Caleb took a cautious sip. "It's strong. It's French." He smiled, just barely, a soft curve of lips that vanished almost instantly. But she saw it, and that tiny flicker of warmth felt like a forbidden spark in the dark. "How old are you, Caleb?" she asked. 21, ma'am." "And how long have you been here?" "Since I was 9. She winced before she could stop herself. "That young?" "Yes, ma'am. My mama was sold to another place. Master Whitfield kept me for work." Eliza's stomach twisted. She knew, of course. Everyone knew the ugliness of the world they lived in. But hearing him say it, softly, plainly, felt different, felt heavier. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Caleb looked at her with something like surprise again. "You ain't gotta say that." "Yes, I do." Another long silence. Another roll of thunder. Caleb finally said, "Nobody has ever apologized for nothing in this house. Not to me." Her chest tightened. She took another drink, trying to steady herself. "You deserve better," she said before she could think better of it. His gaze lifted sharply. Those dark eyes locked with hers, and the cellar suddenly felt too small, too close, too charged. "Ma'am," he said slowly, voice lower now. "Careful saying things like that." "Why?" "Because," he said quietly, "words like that can be dangerous for both of us." She swallowed hard. He was right. Every part of what she felt, what flickered in the air between them, was dangerous. But the storm kept them trapped together, and every second made it harder to pretend she didn't feel something pulling her toward him. She shifted closer without meaning to. "Caleb, can I ask you something?" "Truthfully?" "I'll try, ma'am. When you look at me." Her breath trembled. "What do you see?" His jaw tightened. His breath slowed. He shifted his weight as though trying to ground himself. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he answered, "I see a woman who ain't happy, who walks through rooms like she don't belong in 'em, who got eyes that always look like they waiting on something that never comes." Eliza's throat tightened painfully. "No one has ever said something like that to me. I ain't mean no disrespect." "You didn't disrespect me." She shook her head. "You told me the truth." He looked down at his hands, clasping them as though trying to hold himself still. Eliza leaned just slightly toward him, lantern light soft on her face. "And what do your eyes say, Caleb?" His answer was a whisper torn out by thunder. "They say I should keep distance. But you didn't." "No, ma'am." "Why?" He looked up at her, and the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm in his eyes. "Because when I heard you trapped, I couldn't walk away." Her breath broke. Caleb stepped closer before he could stop himself. Not enough to touch. Not enough to break any rule outright. But enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cold cellar air. Enough that she felt seen. Enough that she felt alive. The lantern flickered wildly between them. "Eliza," he whispered, her name soft on his tongue, forbidden, dangerous, intimate. She felt the ground shift under her feet. She whispered back, "Caleb." But before either could move, the entire cellar shook with a violent crack of thunder so loud they both jumped. The lantern went out. They were thrown into complete darkness. And for the first time, they were not just trapped together. They were trapped together in the dark. The darkness fell so suddenly, so completely, that it felt like the storm had swallowed the entire world in one furious gulp. One moment the lantern's glow flickered weakly on the barrels and stone walls. The next, Eliza was plunged into a blackness so absolute she could not see her own hands. Her breath caught. She wasn't afraid of the dark. She'd grown up in a house of shadowed hallways and candlelit rooms. But being trapped underground, with thunder shaking the ground and no light to anchor her, pressed cold fingers around her heart. "Caleb?" she whispered into the void. His answer came immediately, steady and low. "I'm right here, ma'am." The sound of his voice, calm, deep, close, eased the sharp edge of her panic, but only barely. I can't see a thing," she murmured. "Don't move," he said. "I'll find the lantern." But the second he stepped, she flinched. Even a few inches of distance in this dark felt like falling into nothingness. "No, wait." Her voice trembled despite her efforts. "Please don't go too far." He stopped instantly. There was a pause, quiet but full, like he was weighing something carefully. Then she heard him step toward her instead. His footsteps were soft on the dirt floor, but in the darkness, she felt everyone. He moved slowly, so she wouldn't startle. And after a moment, she sensed him close, very close, though she still couldn't see him at all. "Ma'am," he said gently, "may I reach for your hand? Just so you know where I am." Her heart slammed against her ribs. His touch came a second later, light, cautious, barely more than a brush of fingers against hers. But in the dark, it felt enormous. Her hand tingled under his calloused palm, and she let out a shaky breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "I got you," he whispered. The words wrapped around her more warmly than the blanket. Thunder boomed above them, rattling the cellar beams. Caleb squeezed her hand, not tightly, but firmly enough that she knew he wasn't letting go. "Stay right here. I'll crouch down and relight the lantern." She nodded, even though he couldn't see it. He kept one hand on hers while feeling along the floor with the other. She heard the faint scrape of his fingers brushing dirt and wood. Lightning flashed somewhere beyond the walls, illuminating the vent for a split second, just enough for her to catch the outline of his broad shoulders as he knelt in front of her. Then darkness swallowed them again. He found the lantern, picked it up, and she heard the faint clink of flint. Sparks snapped. Twice. The third time, a small flame finally caught, rising slowly into a quivering golden glow. Caleb lifted the lantern. Its light washed over them both, his face first, illuminated from below, raindrops still clinging to his hair. shadows carving strong lines across his jaw. His shirt was soaked, clinging to each solid curve of muscle, and the scrape on his arm glowed red in the firelight. Eliza's breath shuddered out of her. He released her hand gently, but didn't step away yet. They remained close, far too close for any rule of the world above. But down here, rules had already lost their grip. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Caleb looked down, breaking the connection before it grew too bold. The lantern should hold till morning. Yes, she whispered, though she barely heard her own voice over the pounding of her heart. He stepped back, giving her space, and she exhaled slowly. But the air between them had already changed. The storm did not soften. Rain hammered the vent. Wind howled through the cracks. Yet the cellar felt warmer now, because they had crossed an unseen threshold neither had intended to cross. Or perhaps they had. Eliza returned to her spot near the barrel, drawing the blanket closer. Caleb stayed a few paces away, resting lightly against the stone wall, lantern on a crate between them. She watched him silently, unable to stop her eyes from studying him in the flickering light. "Caleb," she said softly, "were you scared? In the dark?" His eyes lifted to hers. "No, ma'am. Not even a little." He hesitated. "I'm used to dark places. Used to storms, too. It's you I was worried about." Her pulse jumped painfully. "You worry about me?" He looked down again. "I worry about anyone that might get hurt." "That's not what I asked." The words slipped out before she could stop them. He stilled, completely. Slowly, he lifted his gaze. "Eliza." He said her name with a tension that felt like walking a razor's edge. "You know I can't answer that." "You just did," she breathed. He closed his eyes for half a second, jaw tight, the weight of the storm pressing on him as heavily as it pressed on her. When he opened them again, he spoke quietly but firmly. "Ma'am, if anyone heard me say something out of turn—" "We're alone," she said. "Storm don't change the world outside these walls," he replied, voice roughened by conflict. "You know what could happen to me, or to you." Eliza felt the truth of that like a cold hand at her throat. Consequences, punishments, whispers, danger, the overseer, her husband. They could lose everything. But down here, right now, none of that felt real. Only this moment did. "I know," she whispered, "but I also know you climbed through that vent for me. I'd do it for anyone in your place." She shook her head softly. "No, no, you wouldn't." Silence. He didn't lie. He didn't deny it. He didn't look away. He just let the truth hang between them, hot and trembling like the lantern flame. She reached for the bottle again, needing something to steady her. The wine warmed her blood, loosening the tightness in her chest. Caleb watched her, then accepted the cup she poured for him. Their fingers didn't touch this time, but the memory of earlier still pulsed between them. "You said earlier," she began quietly, "that you notice things." "Yes, ma'am." "Do you notice me?" Caleb's throat worked. He set the cup down slowly, deliberately, as if preparing himself for a cliff that had no safe way around it. Finally, he stepped closer, not dangerously close, but close enough that she could feel the tension radiating from him. "Eliza," he said softly, "I notice everything you tried to hide." Her breath caught, her lips parting without sound. "I notice how you hold your breath when Master Whitfield walks in a room. I notice how your eyes go far away when you look out the window. I notice how you touch things gentle, like you scared something might break. I notice." His voice grew hoarse. "How lonely you are." Her heart pierced. Thunder rolled over them like a beast. No one, not husband, not friend, not soul in the world, had ever spoken to her like that. Not with understanding, not with truth, not with the quiet ache of someone who had watched her far more closely than she realized. "Eliza," Caleb whispered, "if anyone knew how I see you, they'd string me up without a second thought." She trembled. "How do you see me?" He looked away, chest rising and falling with the effort it took to hold himself back. "I see you as a woman," he murmured. "Not a mistress, not a name, not a title. A woman." The cellar swayed. Or maybe she did. She stepped closer, only an inch. Only a small, trembling inch. Caleb's breath hitched. Eliza, he warned quietly. Don't. Please. Why? Because, he whispered tightly, I don't trust myself to step back. The words cut through her like lightning. She was inches from crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. She felt it. He felt it. The storm felt it. The lantern flickered wildly. Eliza. He breathed, voice trembling now. You a good woman. A kind woman. But this is a fire we ain't supposed to stand near. She looked up at him, eyes shining in the dim glow. What if I already stepped too close? He swallowed hard. Then, he whispered, God help us both. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to quiet, as if listening. They stood there, suspended between danger and desire, between rule and rebellion, between two worlds that could never meet except here, in the dark, in the storm, in a cellar no one could enter. And then, a loud crash echoed overhead, sharp and sudden. Caleb tensed. What was that? Eliza's heart leapt. Something fell upstairs. They both turned toward the blocked door. No one should be in the house, she whispered. Caleb stepped in front of her instinctively, protective, alert, every muscle on edge. Then something else happened. Another sound. A voice. A man's voice. Above them. Eliza? You down there? Her blood turned to ice. It was her husband. Home hours too early. And the cellar door was stuck. And Caleb was inside with her. Alone. In the dark. The storm had passed some time before dawn, but its echo still clung to the plantation like a stubborn ghost. The oak trees dripped steadily, each falling bead of rain sounding like a ticking clock against the windows of Magnolia House. A mist, cool, pale, almost supernatural, curled low across the ground, drifting between the slave cabins and the main house in thin ribbons. Eliza stood at her bedroom window, still in her nightdress, watching the fog wrap itself around the fields as though hiding something sacred. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the cool stone of the wine cellar beneath her palms, smelled the musk of damp barrels, heard the thunder shaking dust loose from the ceiling, and then she remembered his voice, quiet, deep, careful, the way he had steadied her when she gasped, the way his hand had hovered near hers, not touching, not daring, but close enough to change everything. Isaac. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Saying his name even in her mind felt like trespassing on holy ground. But morning brought danger with it. Morning always did. Somewhere downstairs, she heard Samuel's heavy boots striking the floorboards. Her husband had returned late in the night. She heard the front door's iron latch jolt around midnight, though she did not go down to greet him. He had not come up to her room either. She wondered if he knew she'd been missing. She wondered if she would survive this day if he did. A knock at her door startled her. Eliza? Samuel's voice, low, deep, authoritative. The sound of a man accustomed to being obeyed without delay. She swallowed, straightened, and opened the door only a crack. Yes! He pushed it open fully without waiting. He always did. His boots were muddy. His coat smelled of horses and night rain. His face looked like a carved block of stone, hard, unfeeling. You weren't in your room last night. The chill in his tone made her spine tighten. Where were you? Think, Eliza. Think. I was in the west parlor. The storm frightened me. I fell asleep on one of the couches. His eyes narrowed. Alone? Yes. Samuel. A beat of silence. He glanced past her, surveying the room, as though expecting to find something, someone, out of place. Only when he found nothing did he exhale and step back. You'll join me for breakfast. It was not a request. We have business to discuss. When he left, she shut the door and leaned back against it, her heart pounding in painful, rapid beats. She pressed a hand to her chest and told herself to breathe. Isaac was somewhere outside, working, pretending nothing had happened, pretending last night didn't exist. But she felt it. Every second of it echoed inside her like a lantern flame catching on something dry and fragile. Her husband's suspicion, her heart's betrayal, her fate balancing on a thread. She tightened her robe and went to dress. Morning had only just begun, and already she felt trapped again. Isaac carried a crate of tools across the yard toward the north shed, though his thoughts were nowhere near the wooden box biting into his palms. Every muscle in his body felt charged, like some remnant of the storm still lived inside him. He hadn't spoken a word all morning, not to Jacob, who teased him about being slow, not to Ruth, who eyed him with the sharp suspicion of a woman who noticed things others missed, certainly not to the overseer, Mr. Tanner, whose sour stare lingered too long across Isaac's shoulders for comfort. But Isaac kept moving, kept working, kept breathing with deliberate calm. The wine cellar had changed him. No, that wasn't true. She had. The mistress, locked in that stone room with him. The thunder, the darkness, her trembling voice. The way she had looked at him, not with command, not with fear, not with the distant politeness most white women used with slaves. She looked at him like he was a man, and that was a danger Isaac did not have room to carry. He set the tools down in the shed, bent his head, and pretended to examine a latch so no one would see his thoughts flickering across his eyes. He couldn't let anyone see what he felt, least of all her. But fate seemed to have other plans. Isaac, came a soft voice behind him. He froze. She should not be here. Not by the sheds. Not alone. Not with him. He turned slowly. Mistress Eliza stood beneath the awning, her pale blue morning dress brushing the damp dirt. Her hair was pinned with gentle disorder, as though she had dressed herself in haste. But what seized him most were her eyes, wide, searching, afraid. "We cannot speak here," he whispered, stepping instinctively back into the shadows of the shed. "Anyone could see." "I know." She glanced around, her breath coming quickly. "But I had to be sure you were all right." His heart gave one painful thud. "I am," he said. "But mistress last night. Do not call me mistress when we are alone." The words escaped her before she realized what she had said. Her cheeks flushed immediately, but she did not retract the request. Instead, she stepped nearer, too near, until only a few inches separated them. "Isaac, I don't know what came over me. I don't know what happened. But I can't." "Ma'am!" Both of them jolted apart. The overseer stomped around the corner, his gaze flicking between them with a predator's evaluation. Liza stiffened. Isaac kept his expression blank, his hands at his sides. "Ma'am," Mr. Tanner repeated, touching the brim of his hat with forced courtesy. "Your husband's looking for you. Said he wants you inside now." "Thank you," she replied too quickly. "I was just giving instructions about the storage shed." The overseer's eyes slid toward Isaac again. Suspicious. Calculating. "Yes, ma'am." "Well, best get going." Eliza nodded once and turned away, her step stiff, her breath shallow. Isaac watched her go only for a second. Any longer would be ruin. The overseer waited until she was out of earshot before stepping closer. "You keep your head down, boy," he muttered. "MRS. Hollingsworth's got no business speaking to you, and you sure as hell better not give her any reason to keep doing it." Isaac looked past him, keeping his voice steady. "No, sir." But inside, he felt the first real flicker of fear. Not for himself, for her. Eliza made it halfway to the house before her composure splintered. Her hands shook, her feet faltered. The world felt suddenly unstable, like the ground itself might give way. The overseer had seen them. Not in a compromising moment, thank heavens, but he had seen enough. Enough to wonder. Enough to whisper. Whispers spread like fire in places like this. By the time she reached the back veranda, she had steadied her breathing. Samuel waited inside the breakfast room with a cup of black coffee and a ledger open on the table. "You're late," he said without looking up. "I was speaking to the workers." "Don't." The single word landed with a dull weight. "That's Tanner's job. Yours is to run the household, not the yard." Her jaw tightened. "I know my role, Samuel." Good. He sipped his coffee. Then remember it. She sat opposite him, hands clasped under the table to hide her trembling. Samuel slid a document toward her. I received a letter this morning. I must travel to Savannah tomorrow. Business with the banks. She lifted her gaze. How long will you be gone? A week, maybe more. A dangerous, electric rush swept through her. Not joy exactly, but something perilously close to relief. A week without his footsteps echoing down the hall. A week without his cold eyes watching her every breath. A week of freedom? She pushed down the feeling before it betrayed her expression. You'll manage the estate while I'm gone, he said, and stay where you belong. The implication stung. She nodded quietly. Yes, Samuel. He closed his ledger, stood, and left the room without another word. Eliza waited until the sound of his door shutting upstairs before releasing the breath she had been holding. A week. She pressed her fingers to her lips, ashamed of her own hope. But hope did not care. It began to bloom anyway. Isaac hauled a sack of seed toward the south field that afternoon, but his mind was on none of it. He replayed the brief moment beneath the shed awning over and over again, her voice whispering his name, her nearness, the panic in her eyes when Tanner appeared. He should keep his distance. He should forget the wine cellar ever happened. He should stop glancing toward the house every time he felt her presence like a warm breeze moving unseen through the air. But even as he reminded himself of every reason to stay away, he felt something inside him bending, breaking, reshaping into something dangerous. If Samuel was leaving tomorrow. No, no, he should not think of that. Should not imagine what such days might bring. Days without her husband's boots thundering through the halls, without the overseer's sharp eyes trained on every corner of the yard. But he imagined anyway. And that was when he heard her voice. Isaac! He froze, slowly turned. She stood near the magnolia tree, parasol in hand, its shade concealing her expression from anyone watching the yard. Follow me, she whispered. Not now, later. Near dusk, behind the smokehouse. His pulse leapt. Mistress Eliza, please, she breathed. I must speak with you. Before he could answer, she walked away, graceful but determined, like every step she took was a sin she had already decided to commit. Isaac stood there long after she disappeared, the sack of seed heavy in his arms, the weight of his fate heavier still. Dusk would come. She would be waiting. And he knew, Lord help him, he would go. Dusk fell like a held breath across the plantation, the sky deepening into shades of rose and violet before surrendering to blue. Crickets began their nightly chorus, and lanterns were lit one by one along the veranda, their warm glow casting trembling halos over the wooden railings. The entire estate seemed to shift into a softer world, a world where shadows grew taller, where footsteps could disappear into the darkness, where secrets could move freely if one dared enough to walk them. Isaac wiped his hands on his trousers as he stepped away from the last of his evening tasks. His mind wasn't on the tools, the field, or the overseer's threats echoing at his back. It was fixed on one thing only, behind the smokehouse. Dusk! She would be there. Every instinct screamed at him to stay away. Survival had been trained into his bones. But something deeper, something older than fear, tugged at him. Something that had awakened in the wine cellar and refused to sleep. He moved with the quiet steps of a man who lived his life in the margins of silence. Every sound mattered. Every shadow meant danger. He walked the narrow path behind the storage sheds, past the line of magnolias, and toward the dark outline of the smokehouse. She was already there. Eliza stood with her back pressed to the wooden wall, her parasol replaced by a shawl draped around her shoulders. The fading light framed her in a soft glow, making the air shimmer faintly around her like a candle's edge. When she saw him, her breath left her in a trembling exhale. You came, she whispered. Isaac stopped a few paces away, close enough to hear her heartbeat if he listened hard enough, far enough to keep his world from collapsing too quickly. You asked me to, he said softly, But this is dangerous. Yes. Her voice cracked. Everything about whatever this is feels like standing on the edge of a cliff. And I know I shouldn't be here. I know I shouldn't have asked you to come. But, Isaac, I haven't been able to think of anything else. His jaw tightened as he looked away, not trusting himself to meet her eyes. You should forget last night. I can't. Eliza. I can't, she said again, firmer this time. And I don't think you can either. Silence washed between them like the hush after thunder. She stepped closer before he could react. Not enough to touch him, but close enough that he felt the heat of her body through the cooling night air. Samuel leaves tomorrow, she whispered. He'll be gone at least a week. During that time, Tanner will be running the estate. But my husband's absence, it gives me room to breathe. Isaac's muscles tensed at her phrasing. Mistress Eliza, it doesn't give me room to breathe. It gives people like Tanner room to watch, to wonder, to accuse. If they so much as think. She reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing his sleeve. He inhaled sharply as though the touch burned him, and maybe it did. Isaac, she said, her voice barely a breath, I am not asking you to do anything foolish. I only want to understand what last night meant. To you. To us. He closed his eyes. There it was, the question he had fought all night not to face. His heart was a storm he had no right to feel. It meant, he swallowed hard. It meant more than it should. Her breath caught, and when he opened his eyes, her expression had softened into something fragile and achingly human, something that stripped away titles, chains, houses, and roles until it was only woman and man beneath a quietening sky. Then tell me why we shouldn't speak again, she whispered. Tell me why I should pretend there isn't something real between us. He stepped back, forcing distance before he did something neither of them could undo. Because men like me don't get to feel things, he said quietly. We don't get to admit them. And women like you cannot afford to be seen wanting something you shouldn't. But I do. She said it before fear could stop her. The words hung between them, trembling like a wire pulled too tight. Isaac felt the ground shift beneath him, felt the air squeeze from his lungs, felt the world tilt. I know what I'm risking, she whispered. Do you? He did. And he hated himself for wanting her anyway. Eliza, he murmured, his voice thick. If anyone sees us, if anyone even thinks something, Tanner would put a rope around my neck before the sun rises. Her lips parted in pain, real pain. And Samuel, Isaac continued, wouldn't hesitate to blame you. He would lock you in this house like a prisoner. A tear escaped down her cheek, but she didn't run. She didn't deny it. She didn't step back from him or turn away as she should have. I have lived like a prisoner for years, she whispered. You think bars need to be made of iron? Sometimes they're made of expectations and silence. Her voice wavered, and without thinking, Isaac lifted a hand, slowly, carefully, and wiped the tear from her cheek with the back of his knuckle. It was the lightest touch he had ever given anything in his life. She closed her eyes, leaning into the warmth of him like it was the first kindness she'd felt in months. Please, she whispered, let me be human for once. His hand hovered near her face, trembling. He pulled it back before it lingered too long. I cannot be the thing that breaks you, he said, barely audible. I won't. But what if I'm already broken? She breathed. The question hit him like a blow. The sun had fully set now. Only a slice of silver moonlight filtered through the leaves. In this half-darkness, she looked both dangerous and heartbreakingly vulnerable, like a woman carved from longing. Samuel leaves at dawn, she said quietly. After that, I want to speak with you again. Somewhere no one will see. He hesitated. This was the moment he should end it. He knew that. Every piece of sense inside him screamed it. And if I come? He asked, voice gravel soft. Her eyes shone with something like hope and fear braided together. Then maybe, she whispered. This storm between us wasn't just a storm. His chest tightened painfully. She stepped back into the shadows behind the smokehouse before anyone could see. Just before disappearing around the corner, she looked back once, one single, trembling glance that said everything she dared not say aloud. Then she was gone. Isaac stood alone, breathless, torn clean in half. He knew what he should do, but he also knew what he would do. As the moon climbed higher and darkness folded around him like the wings of a closing night, he felt the truth settle into his bones with the weight of destiny. He would see her again, and nothing on this plantation would ever be the same. The morning Samuel left, the plantation held a strange stillness, as though even the wind refused to move until his carriage disappeared down the long dirt road. Eliza stood on the veranda, hands clasped tightly before her, watching dust rise behind the wheels until it faded into the trees. Only when the last sound of hoofs vanished did she feel her lungs release. She rested her palms against the railing, staring down at the magnolia blossoms scattered like pale stars across the grass. But even as relief washed through her, fear braided itself tightly around the edges. Freedom was never free in this place. Not for her. Not for him. Isaac worked near the far edge of the yard, repairing the low fence where last night's storm had knocked it loose. His shirt clung to his back beneath the rising heat of the day, and every shift of his shoulders looked weighted by more than physical labor. When he lifted his head, their eyes met across the space between them. For a split second, the world fell away, the house, the fields, the overseer's shadow, the chains of expectation. And then he looked down again. She understood why. That night, she sent a single candle flickering in her window, a signal no one would question, but one she prayed he might recognize. But he didn't come to the house. He came to the old oak, the one near the edge of the property line, where the roots twisted like the bones of something ancient buried beneath the earth. Eliza approached quietly, keeping her shawl tight around her shoulders. Her heart pounded hard enough she feared it would echo between the trees. Isaac stood waiting, still as a carved figure, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the quarter moon. "You shouldn't have come," he began. "I had to. You shouldn't have asked me to," he added, but his voice softened, betraying the war inside him. She stepped closer, not close enough to touch, but close enough to hear his breath catch. "What happened in the cellar?" she whispered. "And what happened behind the smokehouse? I cannot pretend it meant nothing. Not anymore." Isaac looked away, jaw tightening. "Meaning something doesn't make it safe." "No," she said, "but pretending it doesn't. That would be a lie, and I've lived enough years in lies." He exhaled sharply, as though her words struck deeper than he wished. She dared one more step. "Isaac, do you want to walk away from this?" Silence swelled, heavy and full of trembling edges. "If you say yes," she continued, "I will. I will keep my distance. I will never put you in danger again. You have my word." Again, silence. Then he spoke, voice low, raw, and honest. "I've tried," he murmured. "God knows I've tried to walk away in my mind. But every time I close my eyes, I see you in that cellar. I hear your voice when the storm hit. I—" He stopped himself, swallowing hard. "You asked if I want to walk away," he whispered. "I can't." Her breath trembled with relief, fear, and something deeper. "But wanting something doesn't change the world we stand in." "I know." He lifted his gaze, and she felt the full weight of everything they could not say. "But there's something you need to know," he said. "Something I never meant to tell you." Her pulse quickened. "What is it?" He hesitated, then took a step closer, the closest they had ever been without danger forcing it. "I've been saving," he said, "for years. Pennies, scraps, hidden under floorboards in the cabins, tucked inside tools. I've been planning to go north. Alone." Her breath stilled completely. "I've nearly enough now," he whispered. "More than enough to make the river by summer. I had planned to leave before your husband ever knew I was gone." Eliza felt the earth tilt beneath her. "You were going to leave," she said faintly. "I was," he answered. "Before you. Before her." before the wine cellar, before the storm that changed the soil of both their lives. "What will you do now?" she whispered. "I don't know." She reached out, not to touch him, but to hold his gaze. "If you run, you must not tell me where. If someone asks, I must not be able to answer." He shook his head. "If I run now, they'll blame you. They'll say you helped me. Tanner would swear to it just to watch you fall." The truth carved a hollow ache in her. "So we cannot meet again," he continued. "Not like this. Not in shadows. Not in secrets." A coldness spread through her chest. "But last night you said—" "I know what I said," he cut in softly. "But I also know what happens to people in stories like ours. And I won't let them write your ending." Wind rustled the leaves above them, the sound like soft footsteps retreating into the night. "Isaac, I care for you. More than I should. More than I understand. I care for you too," he admitted, voice shaking. "More than I have any right to." She swallowed back a sob. "But caring won't save us," he said. "No," she whispered. "But it changes us." He closed his eyes, as though the truth of that hurt. Finally, he spoke again, a whisper pulled from deep within. "Tomorrow night, I'll be near the river road. Not leaving yet. Just looking." A pause. "A man deserves to see the path he might take." She nodded slowly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Will it be the last time I see you?" she asked. He hesitated, then shook his head. "I don't know." Another pause. "I want to say no," he whispered, "but I can't promise the world won't tear us apart." She stepped close enough that their breath mingled, though they still did not touch. "We are already torn apart," she murmured. "But for one night. One night in the cellar, I felt whole." His breath shook. "Eliza." The sound of her name on his lips felt like the first sunrise after a long winter. "Do you want me to stay?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. "More than anything." "Do you want me to go?" he pressed. "No," she breathed. "More than I can bear." "Then what do you want?" She closed her eyes, her voice breaking. "For you to live," she whispered. "For you to survive. Even if it means losing you." He looked at her for a long, long moment, then nodded once. The kind of nod that belongs to men making impossible choices. They stood under the ancient oak, the moonlight scattering through the branches like a blessing and a curse. No touch, no kiss, nothing that could be used against them, nothing that could condemn him, nothing that could shatter her life more than it already was. Only two souls suspended on a knife edge between longing and survival. Finally, Isaac stepped back. "I'll leave before dawn," he murmured. "Only for a few hours. To see the river road. To decide." She wiped her tears with trembling fingers. "Be careful," she whispered. He nodded. She turned away first, because if she didn't, she never would. He watched her walk back toward the house until she disappeared behind the magnolias, swallowed by moonlight and shadow. Then he leaned a hand against the oak, his breath shaking, his future uncertain. And somewhere in the darkness between them, a choice waited. Run, stay, survive, close, begin. And, under the old oak tree, the final whisper of the night drifted on the wind. A promise neither had spoken aloud, but both would carry for the rest of their lives. Nothing that happened in that cellar, or under this moon, would ever truly leave them.